welcome to History Roundtable. I am your host, Ian Nolan Wethington. Today, we're going to look at the CinemaScope era of Hollywood by examining one film that demonstrates a lot of the problems and achievements of the later part of the classical age of Hollywood cinema. The Conqueror. Now, when I mention The Conqueror, many of the more savvy listeners will recognize it as an awful film, sometimes considered one of the worst due to its use of yellowface, its bizarre fascination with romanticizing a mass murderer and rapist, the fact that all-American John Wayne is the lucky actor that got to portray Temujin, the possibility that this film in particular contributed to the downfall of its production company, RKO, and most famously that the film was made downwind of an above-ground nuclear testing site, seemingly causing a 200% increase in the cancer rate of the cast and crew. However, when I think of The Conqueror, I think of a movie that perfectly demonstrates the ambition and excesses of CinemaScope era of Hollywood, and, frankly, a movie that's quite a fun sit with the right mindset. Now, to catch up those of you who have never heard of The Conqueror, I'm going to play you the audio from the trailer, and I'll do my best impression of the narrator to tell you what the text says. Howard Hughes presents The Conqueror. Starring John Wayne, Susan Hayward, all co-starring Pedro Armendariz. Titanic in scope, Titanic in spectacle, Titanic in action. Never has a picture breathed such fire, drama, power.
Temujin, under his heel the cowering nations, in his arms the unconquered woman. He took what he wanted when he wanted it. Borutai meets his fire with ice, matches his fury with flame.
Your hatred will kindle into love.
Before that day dawns, Mongol, the vultures will have feasted on your heart.
Jamuga, tempted to barter an empire for a woman's love.
Suppose, having taken your favors, I refuse the favor you seek.
Then I would reveal your betrayal to Temujin. Horses for me and my slave woman, and safe conduct out of this camp.
I am tempted, woman.
Scene after scene of unimaginable splendor, barbaric passions, savage conquests,
You do well, Kumlik, for while I have fingers to grasp a sword and eyes to see, your treacherous head is not safe on your shoulders, nor your daughter in her bed.
For sheer might and magnetism, it surpasses anything ever filmed before. John Wayne, Susan Hayward, Pedro Armendariz. The Conqueror in CinemaScope. That was probably the silliest thing I've done on this show. Now, before we can get further into the making of this movie, we need to discuss the history of the production studio, RKO. RKO started producing films at the very beginning of the sound film era, when the Radio Corporation of America entered into a new movie-making company with the Keith Albee Orpheum line of theaters, forming Radio Keith Orpheum, or RKO. RKO went on to make two of the most important films in history, King Kong and Citizen Kane, but their bread and butter was B-movies, low-budget commercial motion pictures that are certainly not art house films. By the time The Conqueror came around, RKO was recovering from a rough time. Several bad deals and lawsuits had left RKO lacking in industry contacts and low on funds. New owners then came in and attempted to revitalize the brand by selling the rights to RKO so that the entire library could be aired on TV. Unfortunately, they still didn't have the connections they needed and only made a few more movies before they suddenly shut down production. One of these movies was our topic today, The Conqueror, so we are lucky that we even get to see it. One of the biggest reasons that we do, though, is its star, John Wayne. John Wayne was one of the biggest Western stars of the era. Starting his career in B-movies of the 30s, he rose to become not just a star, but an American icon. So much so that later in his career, he would be very protective of his image, which is what makes his decision to star in this film even more confusing. You see, this film was originally going to be scrapped. The screenplay was written with Marlon Brando in mind for the lead, not that Marlon Brando would have been any less offensive than John Wayne. John Wayne was about to make the last film of his 3-picture deal for RKO, and Dick Powell had been assigned to direct. They were going over various scripts in Powell's office when Powell was called away for a few minutes. When he returned, he found John Wayne enthusiastically looking over the screenplay for The Conqueror, which Powell had intended to throw away. Powell tried to talk him out of it, but Wayne insisted that it was the film he wanted to make. As Powell later said, "Who am I to turn down John Wayne?" And John Wayne was very passionate about this role. He went on a crash diet and popped Dexedrine 4 times a day to get the look he felt fit Genghis Khan. Ah, classic Hollywood. This all culminated in what has been called one of the worst casting decisions of all time. Yes, despite his passion for the project, it seems that John Wayne simply wasn't fit to play Genghis Khan, and not just for the obvious yellow-face reasons. That wouldn't stop old Hollywood. In fact, unlike a lot of old Hollywood yellowface, especially from the early 20th century, John Wayne is not doing the Asian quote-unquote accent. In fact, he's playing Genghis Khan, the infamous warlord rapist conqueror, just as he would play any of his other characters. A little disturbing. John Wayne's Temujin sounds just like Big Jake, except that since there's a history, the history in quotes there, the dialogue is written in a more archaic way. So we end up with a Temujin that talks like a cowboy doing Shakespeare. It just doesn't work. Of course, that's not the only poor casting decision, though. We have red-haired Irish-Swedish Susan Hayward as Bortai, the Tartar princess. John Hoyt playing a Tartar shaman who sounds much more like how many expected John Wayne to sound. Mexican actor Pedro Armendariz as Temujin's brother Jamuka, here pronounced Jamuga, and hundreds of local Navajo actors playing extras throughout the movie, leaving us with quite possibly the only examples of Native Americans playing Asians. It's not just the actors that don't fit either. The historical authenticity of this movie is virtually non-existent. In several scenes, Temujin can be seen wearing bandoliers, I'm assuming to hold the bullets for his Scythian bow. In one particularly long and pointless scene, we see a dancer dressed in a red striped nylon body stocking with pointy sequin hat and fluffy feathers on her fingertips? What? In addition to the costume blunders we have, the setting of the film is in Utah's Escalante Valley, one of the most often used sets in film, especially during this era, but it's remarkably different from the Gobi Desert where the Mongols actually roamed. I mean, obviously filming on the Asian steppes was a bit out of the question for a film studio on its last legs like RKO, but really? They could have picked many different places that would have been infinitely less noticeable than... Really? Really? Escalante Valley for Gobi Desert? Anyways, after the movie's release, critics of the time picked up on these errors. For instance, the fact that Genghis Khan's repeated rape of Bortai was played in the film as romance, while she slowly develops Stockholm Syndrome to the point where she betrays her own people for the man who, I repeat, kidnapped and raped her. That cannot be stressed enough. These problems led to the film, unsurprisingly, being panned. My favorite comment was perhaps, "It never wanes, but it bores." A brilliant pun, as written by Moira Walsh in America Magazine, who question how Genghis Khan, the brutal and cunning leader of the largest empire in world history, could have been portrayed as a lovelorn sap who can't understand why the woman he just kidnapped doesn't immediately fall for him. As the New York Times review concluded, the facts appeared to have been lost in a technicolored cloud of charging horsemen, childish dialogue, and rudimentary romance. The absolute failure of this movie critically and financially, while the film was the most successful movie that RKO had produced in a decade, the $4.5 million it took in did not match its massive $6 million budget, caused Howard Hughes to fall into a deep obsession with the film. He paid an extra $12 million for every existing copy out of his shame. And the movie was projected continuously on a wall in his home, and Hughes watched it over and over again, keeping a tight hold on the film for years, not even allowing it to be shown on television. When viewing the film each night before going to bed, he would even order his personal projectionist to wear a blindfold so only he would see the screen. And the financial failure of this film was also the final nail in the coffin for RKO, leading to the shutdown that I mentioned at the top. Those aren't the only fallouts of this film, though, and I do mean fallout. You see, the setting of the movie was not only very obviously not the Gobi Desert, need I remind you, it was also downwind of the Nevada nuclear test site, and most of the fallout landed in the location where most of the filming took place, Snow Canyon. The cast and crew knew about the radiation as well. Despite this knowledge, they simply didn't care. Wayne even invited his sons onto the set to see the radiation spikes on the Geiger counter. Ugh. This is where the cast and crew would be located for the film's entire production. 13 weeks of breathing in the dust and drinking from local streams. And if that weren't enough, in the interest of authenticity, Howard Hughes paid for 60 tons of the radioactive dirt to be shipped back to RKO's studio lot in Hollywood for reshoots. By 1980, 91 of the 220 cast and crew had been diagnosed with cancer, 3 times the average amount of diagnosis for a group of that size. 46 then died of it, including John Wayne, Susan Hayward, and every main supporting cast member. Pedro Armendariz would also be diagnosed, but committed suicide after hearing the news. Numerous Navajo extras contracted cancer in later years, and even John Wayne's son Michael died in 2003 of cancer. This has led to the film being called an RKO radioactive picture, and becoming infamous for its radioactivity even more than for its major flaws. After the movie's release, John Wayne regretted playing Temujin so much that he visibly shuddered whenever anyone mentioned the film's name. He attributed the film's failure to the fact that, quote, "People wouldn't accept me as Genghis Khan. I've been extolled as rough American personality, and they won't take anything else," unquote. He later seemed to come to realize the true problems of the film and remarked that the moral of the film was, quote, "not to make an ass of yourself trying to play parts you're not suited for," unquote. Now, I said that I would talk about how this movie reflects on the entire CinemaScope era, and I wasn't lying. Yes, this bad, poorly reviewed, radioactive movie is representative of a lot of the amazing and awful things that this era was capable of and did. Most obvious are the failures. The infamous yellowface of this movie was certainly not an isolated incident. Yellowface portrayals date back to at least 1767 in the United States, so the idea was there from the very onset of film. Perhaps the most infamous are the Fu Manchu movies. Fu Manchu being a whole mess of worms involving Asian stereotypes and villainy and Mickey Rooney's portrayal of Mr. Yunioshi in Breakfast at Tiffany's. Even now, Hollywood continues to rely on racial stereotypes, and I'm not just talking about black people. On CBS, a SalesGenie.com ad aired during the 2008 Super Bowl featuring a panda couple with stereotypical Asian accents, and the movies Grindhouse, Balls of Fury, and I Now Pronounce You Chuck and Larry, and Crank High Voltage all feature white actors as Asian caricatures. Now, I'm not saying those movies are high art or anything, but seriously, we're still doing Yellowface. Really. Alright, moving on. Another problem of the film that reflects on the era was the lack of safety for humans and animals involved in the movie. Ignoring the radioactive concerns for a minute, many stunts, especially those involving large numbers of horses, were performed during the filming, resulting in many injuries to stuntmen and horses alike. The horses quite often died from these injuries, although in this era of film more precautions were taken than in earlier years. The 1926 version of Ben-Hur, for example, saw the death of over 100 horses. Unfortunately, I can't find exact numbers on the amount of horses that died in The Conqueror, but considering the amount of horses used and the stunts that were required, it would probably not be an acceptable number today. Actually, forget that. It wouldn't be an acceptable number today. However, this movie has its bright parts, I promise, that are representative of the era of film. This was a time when Hollywood epics were truly epic. Now, I don't want to sound like a film snob here, but when you compare the Charlton Heston Ben-Hur with the one that recently came out, that gray-washed piece of film, you can see a lot more ambition on the screen in the Heston version. It's brighter. It's got these magnificent sets instead of this CGI mess. Not to crack on CGI or anything, but the sets look a lot better. And they definitely show off creativity in how they are able to create these sets. Now, with The Conqueror, you can also see the film's massive budget on full display in these scenes, some of which are worth watching solely because of their grand scale and sense of realism. You can see similar scenes to this grandeur even in Mystery Science Theater movies like The Magic Voyage of Sinbad, aka Sadko, which isn't even a Hollywood film. So really, The Conqueror is not the worst film ever. That would be Transylvania Police. Unlike Transylvania Police, The Conqueror is really a reflection of the times, the era of Hollywood in which it was made. The racism embedded in the film was commonplace in its time. The woman and sexism were also common. The film's scale and ambition were both impressive and what led to RKO closing its studios. On the other hand, the film honestly is kind of amazing in that it's such a great example of the CinemaScope era. Also, it's just downright fun to watch, in an ironic sense, or not. It's great good bad movie material nonetheless. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little divergence in the film history and didn't mind hearing only my voice for an entire episode. Next time, I should have a guest that you guys will love. But for now, it's time for the book recommendation of the week. And this time, it's The Last Camel Charge. Great book. It is funny, well written, and it takes one of my favorite subjects in all of history, taking something really small and using that as a lens to view the history around it. In this instance, the camel unit of the United States military. Yes, we had one of those. It was in use in the Mojave Desert, mostly as a way to step down on the Native Americans in the desert, but also as a way to keep tabs on the Mormons in Utah. Fitting, since this film that we discussed today was filmed in Utah. Anyways, this book not only takes a look at the Mormons' retreat to Utah and the Native American wars, but it also looks at the Mexican-American War and the Civil War through the eyes of camels. It's great, trust me. So, for now, I'll leave you with the quote-unquote romantic theme from The Conqueror.